Hey everyone. I was so ready to do that smoothly, and you have the cutest face when you give me the thumbs up. So Lisa presses the record in case you wonder why Kari always sounds like she doesn't know where she is. 'Cause sometimes I'm looking at the screen. Are we on? Hello everyone. Welcome back. If you meant to listen to the things we know, welcome back. And if you didn't, stay here because we're kind of fun. So Lisa and I are diving into a topic that hits home for many of our listeners, including me, and that
Yep.
is the sandwich generation.
Yep. I want to give a shout out to our friend Genevieve because this was really her. Like she had texted me one morning and then I sent text to Kara. I was like, why haven't we done sandwich generation? And I forgot that you and I had talked about doing this. We just had never gotten around to it. But it's a unique situation that most kind of boomers didn't deal with, but Gen X, and I'm certain following every generation following us will deal with, which is caring not only for your children, but for your aging parents simultaneously. And, it is a balancing act that more and more people are finding themselves in.
Yeah, absolutely. It was kind of fun, as we do sometimes. It's like, I'm curious because Lisa brought up a good point. Like, how has COVID influenced it? Like,
Hmm.
and just with the aging population, people had kids older, but it's just an interesting thing. So we looked at a few like articles over the last 10, 15 years. And some of these things have remained true no matter when,
Right.
no matter when it happened. But sandwich generation faces challenges, obviously, caregiving costs, financial difficulties, reduced hours, turn down promotions. We'll get
That
into
one's
that a little bit.
interesting.
That
Yeah.
one's really true. And I mean, you and I both know, you worked with me. How many times did people who knew I was a caregiver, of an adult son, or had stuff even way back going on with my dad, we'd like, oh, we didn't want to ask you to do that because we know you have a lot going on,
Yeah.
and it's
Yeah.
like
So it's like you're not even
this,
given the
right,
opportunity.
this quote
Yeah.
unquote consideration, but can lead to turn down opportunities.
Right.
And caregiver burnout obviously leads to feelings of depression, guilt, isolation. I know that stuff well. Sandwich
I bet.
generation members may also experience, sorry, I'm gonna sneeze. They might also experience hay fever. Hold on. Role strain, where they struggle to fulfill their roles as spouse, parent, and child while maintaining other responsibilities. God, the more we're talking about this, the more it's like literally viscerally lighting me up,
I
because
can
I think
imagine.
about like my siblings and I, and different stages we were in when my dad had his transplant, and then the recovery afterwards, what didn't go so smoothly. I had really little kids, so I'd
Mm,
hop on the plane with my two younger ones, hand them, luckily, very luckily, to my mother-in-law, and then go be with my mom at the hospital. But then later, like when things were going on with Griffin, and my brother and sister's kids were older, they've done way more with my mom than I've been able to do. So
right.
I don't know how people do the sandwich generation as single, like only children. I have a friend who, has a college age son, a daughter around Miles's age who's disabled, and a mom who just has been in hospice for a while, who just passed. And I think,
Mm,
wow, she has no siblings.
yeah.
Anyway,
Well, and also one of the things, that isn't in here is the fact too that it is in here a little bit later. So I'll just
mhm,
presence it. We talk about it a little bit more later, but the idea of, you know, we don't live by our families anymore,
right,
oftentimes,
right.
right? You know,
Yeah,
we'll
yeah.
get into that more. Go ahead.
So Pew Research Center 2021 survey said 23% of adults in America are part of the sandwich generation, and 54% of them are in their 40s. So obviously that's 40 people in their 40s are raising children,
Yeah.
um, if they have children. So what is the best option to support both the adult and the adult child so they can successfully age without burning out on both ends?
Yeah, I mean, I really only had to deal with it for a short amount of time, between when we moved out here to LA in 2017. My dad started getting sick in 2018, and then he passed in 2019. No, he must start getting sick in 2017. He passed in 2019. So I just had this short amount of time where I was worrying about both, but it was an intense amount of time. So I do think this is going to be, and I'll say this now, just if you're one of our younger listeners, this is still going to benefit you to hear all of this stuff and to start
Totally.
thinking about this now, because again, is to me a Gen X situation. Um, but it's going to be a millennial situation and a Gen Z situation and a Gen Alpha situation and on and on and on and on because we are living longer and we are having kids older. And that's
Totally.
what puts us in the sandwich generation.
Oh my gosh. Do you think we need to define this? Like where this term came from?
I mean, we sort of already have, but I mean, it's really just as simple as you've got aging parents and you've got children, and you're managing both in some way, shape, or form. I
Yeah.
never had to worry, and you, I don't think had to worry about a financial support. However, we would have had my dad lived longer because he was running out of money. But I
Yeah.
lucked out, and I never had to do. But the energetics
Yeah.
of waking up every morning to texts from his caregiver or my sister or him, phone calls from him at 5 in the morning because he was on the East Coast and I was out here. And then also then getting up my kids out the door.
That's a
A lot.
really excellent point when it comes to having aging divorced parents.
Yeah.
That it's you and your sister and the caregiver.
Yeah.
Whereas, you know, with my dad, my mom was absorbing a lot of that first and then digesting it and then, kind of
Yes.
passing it on.
Yep.
Um, and then there were times we stepped in to help her with it. But like same with, that is interesting. Like
Yeah.
there's a lot more on the people in the middle when it's the one parent.
Yeah.
And it's not just about the caregiver. It's about being a caregiver on both sides.
Yeah.
That's it. It just includes everything, like daily tasks. When I think about, I literally might be in the middle of dealing with a seizure, and my mom, and my mom is, if you've met my mom, she's sharp as a tack. So that there's not like she doesn't require any care at this point at
Right.
all. But she doesn't hear well, and she doesn't have her hearing aids in, and she's not asking for anything, but sometimes like I want to be really mindful and careful and give her the presence that she deserves and not have her miss anything. But I'm also like, trying to tend to something else. And sometimes all of that stress is in my mind. She's not doing it to me, but I still have it. Like I'm trying to like
Right.
think about two different things.
Well, I think that's it, right? I guess again, I'm speaking from my experience, what I know of your experience. I never felt angry at my dad for being sick, or so there wasn't that wasn't the strain. It wasn't that aspect of it. And because I guess I what do I say, it's like I wasn't angry at him, clearly wasn't angry at my kids, and yet that because there was no outlet for it, I maybe it felt more overwhelming. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. Again, a recent survey found that 72% of sandwich caregivers feel overwhelmed, with many feeling emotional, physical, and again, some financial stresses as well. um yeah, I mean, I can go back so easily to, again, because my dad was on the East Coast or in Ohio, I was in LA. There was that 2 years of time where I would wake up to situations. So like
Right.
the minute I woke up, I had texts, or I had voicemails at 5 in the morning. So I was waking up stress,
Ugh.
immediately thrown into stress. But by 8 o'clock or even 6 o'clock, I could then be like, okay, we're done for the evening.
Yeah.
It was just this weird switch of time. Um,
Yeah.
and my and thank God my sister was close. She was closer, so she dealt with sort of more administrative day-to-day things, and I took the brunt and managed more of the emotional, uh calming him down situation, because I was across the country is all I could do. I really, I've always said this, and I do think Amy knows this, we made a really great pair.
That's so
We
nice.
had lanes we were good at, and we stayed in them.
That's really nice.
Yeah.
Talking about this makes me think of a very good friend of mine I mean, they have three living parents among the two of them, she and her husband, and they're all in a high needs situation, but especially her mom. She's really
Mm.
declining since a hip. She has Parkinson's and a hip fracture. And, they're sending one kid to college, preparing to send the second one to college. So when you think about the financial ways people are stretched thin, and then where it like takes their time, she's literally this summer trying to spend as much time as she can with her mom during the precious moments that are sons home from college, right?
Yeah.
And then people are also saving for their retirement when they're in those situations. So like thinking about, I mean, and they're okay, but like really they're not really having much time to breathe in there.
Right.
So it's no surprise that I think it's like that same research showed that 38% are reporting financial strain, like they are dipping
Mhm.
into their retirement sometimes to support parents and kids. So yeah.
And no big surprise.
Mhm.
This is, overly, the challenges are over amplified for women. And we're the caregivers by nature, by biology. There's nothing wrong with that. But I think it's fascinating, and I'm sure you know people um, who the wife is also handling the in-laws.
Yeah.
You
Oh yeah.
know,
Well, that's that same situation as yeah.
yeah, yeah. You and I, even when, so my parents both passed, and then my mother-in-law declines, and Darren was he was the main contact. He has a brother, but Darren pretty much handled everything. Um, Fine, he was fine with it. Clay was fine with it. I didn't really, again, she was across the country, so I wasn't involved in any of that, other than to support Darren, which is its own,
Right.
emotional piece of it. You and Brendan kind of seem to handle your in-laws together.
Um, they don't need to be handled that much by us. They have five
Right.
living children, and yeah, we
But like I know
all
you like to come down
yes,
here and visit and
yes,
spend
yes.
time and support them. I guess that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredible because what she's going to be 82, and I don't think she's ever had anybody else clean her house, and it's a huge
Wow.
house, and she like painted the whole thing herself last year. So kind of
Oh
a
my
stubborn
gosh.
Irish lady, retired nurse. So she's incredible, and yet we do worry because there's been fractures and other things, and we're like, oh, it's a lot of house. So at some
Yeah.
point, yeah, but you're right. I mean, the more we're talking about this, the more like it's more the emotional feeling of wanting time with them, and they live far
Yeah.
away, and it used to be kind of easy for us to fly in and see both sets of parents, and luckily they like each other, so we could do meals together and all that. But I mean, yeah, and I want to get into the emotional part of it because it
Yeah.
is interesting because even if you are, you know, we're talking about my mom. She lives in a retirement community, but she still, wants to have her own place, and she
Mhm.
does. And then I think about my sister who works in retirement, assisted living and
Mhm.
independent living programs, and the like a lot of her role is supporting. She calls herself daughter on property, which is so cute that you
Oh, I love that.
which is such a sweet thing to say to them because I think it relieves everybody. Oh,
Yeah.
ideally, it would relieve everyone. It would probably make some people feel guilty, but that some of these people they do have like kids playing sports and in school and
Right.
with medical needs, and so it's nice to have them somewhere where there's someone like my sister who's kind of doing some of this in between, and she often really handles beautifully. In fact, I'm thinking while we're doing this, like it might be good to go live with her since we lost that one live with her that one time it went into the
Yes.
ether
Oh my gosh, I would love that.
about this sandwich generation that she supports when she has to say to them, it is time for them to go into memory care. Like it is
Yeah.
time. And those are such hard things. You talk about the emotional toll this can take. It's already hard when they decide this is too much for you and for me, and for mom or dad. Why don't we get somewhere where you have 24 care support? And then once there, then this one needs to go to memory care. Like those things are so delicate, and the emotional toll it takes on the person in that sandwich position is immense. And I'm watching it with that same friend I was talking about, just because she's top of mind at the moment in this conversation. It's so difficult, like to be there because her mom's not herself, and
Yep.
she's saying things, and sometimes it isn't her normal warm self. Some stuff's coming up, and then also that leaving her is awful.
Yep.
So it's like being there is not easy, not being there is horrible. So I
I feel
that
that.
yeah. So it's stressful, and there's just so many different emotional tolls this can take. And also, you and I coach a lot of people where it's just part of the growth and self-awareness journey that people are on sometimes when they're working with the coach. Like this childhood stuff comes up. And so in that vulnerable time at the end of life, it's going to stir everything up.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Again, thinking back to when you talk about the emotional piece of it, we'll talk about the guilt in a second, but I think there's something really I want to point out around if you have parents who are struggling with Alzheimer's or dementia, something I was not prepared for, my sister was not either, is that it seems to bring out their worst qualities amplified.
Hmm.
And so the one thing that just jumps out to me for sure was my dad, and we talked about this in one of the very first episodes. My dad had issues with people who had what he considered to be weight
Oh,
problems.
yes.
And so again, that's how I ended up where I am now, how I ended up at Weight Watchers. I don't regret it, but when he started, he'd go to doctor's appointments and he'd see other humans that were bigger than he thought they should be. And he had no problem talking about it out loud and loud, and I just remember Amy and I sort of like, oh, it's like, oh, that's right. That's who he is, and
Hmm.
it is shocking, because you're thinking to yourself, where is my mom? Where is my dad? This is not who they are, but they're not who they are. They are not that anymore. And so that that emotional toll. Trying, I remember Amy and I really struggling around dad not wanting to get out and see people. Like he'd stay in his room when he was in assisted living all the time. And the best thing that was ever told to us was that once they sort of move into dementia, because he didn't have Alzheimer's, he had dementia, they want a small space. So that was one of those things where Amy and I kind of were able to let go of what we were feeling guilty about, that he wasn't getting out of his room. Should we be there? Should we be trying to get him out and about more often? And then the caregiver was like, yeah, no, this is actually what makes him feel safe, so it's okay. When he wasn't taking care of himself like he always used to. Like all those things were so confusing to Amy and I. We were like, my dad was meticulous about
Yeah,
about the way he takes care of himself, and it just went to pot
that
as
was
the
hard.
dementia took on. And so that's an emotional thing. The confusion around how your parents are turning out, because they do turn into little kids again,
Oh my gosh,
not
I
in a good
know.
way.
Oh my gosh. You know, what's really I'm thinking about this was hard not to go into like my dad post transplant. It aged him so much when
I
I mean
remember
he
you
was
saying
so
that.
healthy and it's 72, he looked 92. It was
Mm,
it was haunting.
yeah.
He, and yet there was so many ways his like sharpness would come through and we'd know he was there, but a different kind of sandwich thing that my mom was in, and I think I've told you this before, within like 4.5 years, maybe it was a little more than that, but definitely within 3 years, she lost both parents and my dad. So my
Mm.
my grandfather was like late 90s and my grandmother was mid 90s. And there were times in there where I remember talking to my one aunt going like, I don't know if my mom's going to be able to get away, to help you with to be there with you guys and your parents. Like my dad's not doing well, so we one of us would go be with my dad and the other one or two of us would go with my mom out there. And my mom and her siblings were still very actively talking about how to support their parents, right? And their
Wow.
kids were grown, we had kids too. It's like,
Right.
but so it wasn't, my mom wasn't as much sandwiched between her kids and her parents, but between caring for a dying husband or a very ill husband at end stage. He had end stage kidney failure at that point
Mm.
because and heart failure. So she was sandwiched between that, literally like leaving a husband who needed a lot of care to go, help her dad after her mom died. That kind of thing. So that was intense.
Well,
Um,
and that's an interesting way of looking at sandwich generation, that it's not
yeah,
always about kids. It's
right.
about if you are sandwiched between taking
Yeah.
care of, it could be a sibling and
Yeah.
a parent. It could be a partner and a parent. I mean, there's a lot of
Yeah.
different ways, because we're living longer, I should say, that sandwich generation shows up. It's not
Yeah.
really cut and dry. That's
I
a
mean, you have
really
people
interesting
you
point.
care about. Like, yeah, there's
Right.
people who may not have children, but they have people they care about, and they're divided between. I would really like to be there for this person and this
Yeah.
person. I think about like after my dad passed, it wasn't terribly long after. I can't remember now. Time is so warped for me. When her sister passed, and my mom was there for that, and I think about my aunt's one of her sons had little kids, you know what I mean? So
Hmm.
I mean that had to have been hard. So there's a lot that happens for people who are any type of caregiver.
Yeah.
and that sometimes those are happening in more than one case. So you're just juggling it. It's tough.
You just said the thing about time, and I always sort of gallows humor say time has no construct since COVID. But now I'm wondering, yes, that's true because I know everybody says it. Everybody feels the sense of like, where is time? What is time anymore? But also, I wonder if it isn't tied to some of this. If you are being pulled in a million different directions, parents, kids, siblings, partners, time does just disappear. It does become
It's
very
true.
globulous because it's just like, oh
Yeah.
my God, I've got so much going on. But with
Right.
that being said, can we talk a little bit about what COVID did to all of this?
I know, true. And I did want to just mention this part because I didn't want to skip over it. When you say all that and we talk about, you and I have a retreat that we talk about when we were thinking about presence, right? Like
Yeah.
how do we invite people into presence when setting an intention? Nothing takes you out of presence more than like logistically thinking about people who need you. And
Yes.
I remember like being just glued to my cell phone when my dad was, really, he was in and out of the hospital, just feeling like I couldn't be without it. I needed to know what was going on. And then with Griffin,
Yeah.
caregivers really, like this, that you want to kind of not be so glued to your phone, but you feel like I need to be reached in kind of an emergency. So that means, and that makes a lot of sense. Being a caregiver and being sandwiched in between that leads to burnout, depression, physical health issues. People aren't sleeping
Yes.
as well. They're not taking
Well, their
care of
cortisol
themselves.
is like through the
Yes, through the
roof because
roof.
of stress.
And
Yep.
so the APA, which is American Psychological Association, did a study that 30% of caregivers reported significant debilitating stress, which can manifest in issues like headaches, migraines, sleep problems, and weakened immune system. So I did want to cover that
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
that's alarming, but also not surprising. Okay, let's
Right.
talk about
Yeah.
COVID. um, yeah, we can't talk about. Lisa made a really great point. So it was funny. At first, I couldn't find any recent articles, and then that I had, you reminded me to go pull that up. Um, COVID-19 brought up so much. And if anyone who was at all following, there was a lot of people, but Brene Brown was one. Like her mom was in a assisted living place, and she
Mm.
described a very funny but also harrowing scene of she like described it like literally if you can picture a movie where a door is coming down, like they were like body rolling under it to get their mom out at the very last minute before they were like not going to let anyone in. Like it was that kind of feeling. It
Wow.
wasn't like literally that
Yeah.
way,
Yeah.
that's what
Yeah.
it felt that way. And I paid attention to it because my sister was working, as she does, in a place where suddenly like there was a point where okay, you can't come in and visit and they can't get out and they can't even visit with each other. She felt like an RA again, telling them not to party with each other in the hallway. Like it was ridiculous, that what happened to, I mean, we want to talk about the sandwich generation, but also what happened to elderly people because we just didn't know how vulnerable they were, where we just isolated them so quickly. And then the stress of people who couldn't get their parents together with their children and vice versa, but also like, how do I worry about not just their health, but their loneliness and also keep them safe?
I mean, I've said it a million times. I have that as shitty as it was to lose both my parents in 5 months, they did not suffer through COVID. I think my mom probably died from something tied to COVID. But thank the Lord, I did not have to
Mm.
deal with that. I remember even trying to comprehend what would that look like to not be able, if my mom had survived what I assume was a heart attack, what would that be like to not have been able to see her in that entire time? So it is its own level. It's also its own level of stress for the caretakers because it
Ugh.
happened so quickly, right? The shutting down and the isolating,
And we didn't
and
know what the fuck we were doing.
100%. I mean,
All we knew was like we don't want to get grandma sick, and
totally. Yeah, no, I mean, it was horrible, but I mean, that is yet another that those couple of years, I mean, we could do a whole episode on
we
COVID-19
probably
in those
will.
2 years, but good
It'll
Lord
be the
Almighty.
5-year anniversary next year.
Yeah.
We will
Oh my
definitely do it.
God. Will it
Um,
really? Jesus,
it
talk
will
about
be.
time.
I know, chills.
Woof.
The what's interesting too is like I think about my I have such a big family. I have like a million aunts and examples that pop in my head and on this topic. But my cousins, they're 4 sisters, their mom, had the same thing my dad and their older sister had, the
Mm.
pulmonary fibrosis, so they were really careful about her.
Ah,
So before she died, they didn't get a lot of, like, actual physical time with her, and that was heartbreaking, and they did
I
a
can
lot of
imagine.
visits through a screen and through a window, and she was so lovely about it, but, like, that was difficult and painful, and I do feel like as painful and lonely as it was for the generations on either end, knowing what my cousins were feeling and going through during that time, and just never feeling like you're getting it right and just not sure and worried, and that's just a huge toll.
Yeah. Yeah, that was, yeah, it's crazy. Um, and so we already talked about this a little bit, or we touched base on the physical part of all this, the physical health of
Mhm.
the caretaker in between. I mean, I know that in that time between my moving to LA and both my parents passing, then get through the election, I mean, I gained about 15 pounds.
Mm.
And I wasn't doing anything different. I was still being active, all the things. And the minute we've talked about this, my parents were gone, the news was no longer being watched, the weight came off. So I mean, there is, you might wonder, like, why am I doing everything right and I am still holding on to weight, or I'm not feeling good? Your cortisol is through the effing
Yes.
roof.
Yeah.
Now you are still in the middle of all this and are a caretaker. I mean, talk a little bit about what the health implications are.
Yeah, and I share with this often because I'm kind of on this journey of, okay, it's- what is it like? You and I laugh about this all the time, like best chapter yet, sassy, sassy, and then all of a sudden, boom, like I was thinking I was past what I thought was my version of menopause. It's a huge monumental joke, and then there's layers of trauma of things
Yeah,
that have unfolded with what we've been through with Griffin and how it's affected each of us. So there's those things. So it's like, what is like, is it PTSD? Is it lack of sleep? Is it menopause? Like, what is it? And I do think it is under the umbrella of caregiver,
yeah.
of caregiver effect, right? There's the stuff that was coming on with Griffin came on right towards the end of my dad's life.
Mm,
And so it was painful and it's remained painful for me. I have amazing siblings. They are incredible. I think back to like what my friend Beth, who, is a hospice nurse, so she really observes stuff deeply, but she observed about us around when we lost my dad. We all were, really kind of coming in and tag teaming for my mom. But since then, honestly, when my mom is needed most, like my brother and sister do the lion's share, and they're really supportive and understanding that I'm the only one who still had kids at home. Or, well, that's not technically true. My niece and nephew are back briefly, and my other nephew's back briefly, but they all went off to school.
right.
I still have two kids at home, and one of them has high medical needs and can't be left alone. So they understand that, but it is painful for me that I
Yeah,
can't do as much for my mom, or that I can't. So these things over time, definitely, when I step back and look at, oh, I was so much healthier and so much better about self-care before this stuff, got more intense. So it's just an invitation. Like when you step back and you look at, like, why am I experiencing some medical stuff, or like feeling less healthy, less in shape, I have to look at like where I kind of crept backwards in my development of, like I go into this mode of taking care of people and I can forget to take care of myself. That's what
yeah,
happens to caregivers. I actually know better. I help people with it. It makes me feel like a monumental hypocrite sometimes, and I can laugh about it and readjust. So I actually have the tools to know how to recognize it and get back where I need to be, but it doesn't mean it doesn't happen. It happens all the
right.
time. It's so easy to go into a mode of, okay, what do I need to do right now? Females do this all the time. It's
Yeah,
just our generation. We just know how to like be where everyone needs us to be to keep things rolling. So it's tough. And I think, what was your question? I feel like I went off on a
no,
tangent,
I would
but
say, well, you were, no, you answered it. It was the idea of like how this does affect you physically, and what I'm hearing is, even if you know better, it is what it is. So
Yeah.
I guess as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking the invitation to anybody who is feeling like, oh, I've gained weight. Oh, I'm this. Oh, I'm that. I know better. I should be taking care of myself. Be gentle. Be
Hmm.
gentle with yourself. It doesn't matter if you know better. In the we are in you as a sandwich generation, it's a very specific time of life that, yeah, you might not always get to the gym. You might not always get to eat the healthiest foods. Don't add insult to injury by then guilting yourself around that, I think is what
Yeah.
I'm hearing,
And I would say anecdotally,
Yeah.
for me, what helps and the reason I can, like I can act absolutely and have already forged a path out of this back to like, you know, putting myself first in a way that everyone wins is that there's two things, and we already touched on one. Presence is a huge tool to like have at the ready when you are in a sandwich generation, because it's just like trying to be a working mom with little kids. You can't be with your parents feeling guilty about not being with your kids or not being there for your kids. You can't be with your kids thinking about your parents. I mean, that will happen, but if you can allow yourself to ask for help and hire people if you need
Hmm.
to, or empower other people to be present in your kids' lives or in your parents' lives, you're going to be able to have a little more time for yourself so that when you are with them, you can be more present and enjoy that. Like in the moments, like really enjoy an engaging conversation or a tender moment, a tender, vulnerable moment. Maybe you're bathing your parent, or maybe, you're helping them get dressed, but really kind of be present and find the gifts in those moments, which leads to my second thing. The other tool is when you're in the sandwich generation, it's so easy to start racking up and identifying all the things that are going wrong, like all the things that are
Mm,
hard. Oh
yeah.
my God. And then this happened. And then this happened. I mean, you can think of a text I sent you earlier this week where like a bunch of things happen. So it's really easy to do that, but it is much easier. And the reason it's easier to do that is because it's not the norm. But we forget that. We think
Right.
it's the norm because we're like, oh, and this happened, this happened. But it stands out because actually there's way more lovely things happening that we take for granted. So if you can like step back and identify those and look for those and bring your attention to that, like it was super sunny and we made a great meal together. And even though there was a lot of dishes, we had a lot of fun, cleaning up together, listening to music, and there was birds chirping, and there was her favorite flowers were blooming, or we made it down to the beach and had this really great time. So there's way more of that. So the two
Yeah.
tools are like presence and focusing on like all the good things that are like happening even either just because or happening because of what you two are doing together, or you as a group. So I don't know.
Well,
I don't know
and
if
I
that
would
helps.
argue, especially when we're talking about our parents, being able to be present and acknowledging the good times is going to be really help in grief.
Mhm.
You don't want to look back at the last couple of years and just see all the things that you had to do and all the stress
Yes.
of it. Like, so being really present, it also then makes me think of like when we had Amy Pickard on around Good to Go. I mean, these are the moments that's really fun to ask your parents about things in their life from when they were younger, pre you being
Yeah.
born, have some of those really great conversations to learn about history, and or even
So
asking them
true.
some of the things that, are important to them as they move through this journey.
True.
Those are ways to
Absolutely.
be really present and make memories versus just making stress.
Yeah. And I don't mean to make us jump back and forth, but I do want to focus on, because when I say all that and I hear you say that beautiful stuff, I think it's a privilege if you can actually get into that space. Some people might be
Sure.
single parents,
Absolutely.
especially like you mentioned earlier, women are much more likely to take on the caregiver role. Why is that?
Well, I mean, I do think partly it's just yes, there's the societal expectations, there's gender roles. We are the primary caregivers. It is our nature to do that. We are biologically built to be caregivers. So there's nothing wrong with that. But unfortunately, because of that, we easily fall into it, and it can affect our career and our personal goals, because all of a sudden anything that we thought was going to be our next best chapter has to be put aside. And so then, yeah, like the idea of losing opportunities in any way in your career, which
Yeah.
could impact financial. So there you go back. Maybe you're not necessarily spending money to help your parents with their health, but if you're not able to take on other responsibilities or get a promotion or whatever,
Mhm.
that might impact your family financial
I
things.
mean, for sure. I remember, and this isn't, I mean, God, this isn't something I even had thought about. I totally forgot, but I did take on I did say yes to and accepted a like full-time grant writing position that I then turned down when I realized like that my dad, if he didn't get that transplant, was going to pass. And it was a choice. My
Yeah.
siblings didn't need me to do it. My mom didn't need me to do it. It was a choice of I don't want to be obligated full on these full-time hours with little kids when I want to be, traveling to Southern California. So I actually found them someone else who I knew would be a really good fit. And then they hired me part-time to do some contractual stuff. But I just remember thinking, how many people have to do this
Yeah.
and they might not have other options? It's so interesting. And I've seen caregivers of kids with special needs also do the same. There's
Yeah.
just a constant juggle there. Whew.
Yeah, so I mean, it would be nice for sure if society we address this at a societal level. I think, as Gen X gets older and we have perhaps a Gen X president coming up in
Mhm.
November. Not perhaps, I believe there will be a Gen X president in November. This is the kind of stuff it doesn't until you have leaders that are dealing with this stuff, it doesn't change. It's like
Yeah.
anything else. That being said, it comes back to you have choice, or you may have choice, but you do have a voice. So
Mhm.
ask for help. Ask for help. This is one of those moments where I want to remind people that people like to help. So
It's
when
true.
you are in the thick of going through working with your parents, working with your kids, whatever it might be, if you ask someone to help, they will be happily do it,
Mhm.
and for Amy and I, for my sister and I, we had to hire somebody, and part of that was tied to, again, my sister had younger kids, even though she was close, but also, there's a part where dad had dementia. He was not a very nice person sometimes. And Amy and I emotionally couldn't handle that. We needed somebody who was trained to be a caregiver of people with dementia, and knew how to, then we didn't take the brunt of it. Didn't mean we didn't get some of it, but
Yeah,
there is if and I know all of this stuff, as you just said, like this can be somewhat privilege for sure. But you've got friends and family and kids that
yeah,
probably, mostly kids are older if we're in the sandwich generation. Ask people to help
totally.
and tell
And
them what you need. Don't just say, "Can you help me?" Tell them what you need.
I'm pretty sure you and I both at HCI coached people who were developing programs for people in the sandwich generation. And a lot of it, like they're giving just free, beautiful content out there and support. And
Yeah.
some of them offer really affordable group program
Hmm.
opportunities because it is so, I mean, I just know as a caregiver of an adult disabled son, like there are so many good things that can come out of just meeting with other people who understand what you're going through. It's so wonderful to get that kind of empathy that nobody else really can relate to. And there's so many people just isolated. We found this at our retreats
Yeah.
that are isolated, thinking they're the only ones who can't handle it.
Yes.
Everybody feels that way.
Yes. Let's say that
Everybody.
again. Say that again.
There are
So
so
many
many
of
people,
us.
they're isolated and busy, thinking they're the only ones that can't handle it. And frankly, the other thing is, I think nobody really realized. I think we all assumed once our kids were grown and mostly out of the house that we'd have a lot of time for ourselves and each other. And it's not true. People are like, taking care of their parents now, or
Yeah.
they're working more than they used to afford college, or there's just
Yeah.
a lot more to it than we expected. And I think when you can get together with people who also think that way, like I
Yeah.
can't handle it either, then you realize, oh, we can. We've bought into this really unrealistic set of expectations that are making us feel this way. But there's actually a way to like back down from that.
What I love is that when you get together, you might be thinking, oh, great. So we all get together and bitch. It's misery loves company. It's actually the exact opposite. You just nailed it, right? When you get together in community like that, you realize you're not the only one. And you get to see other people, you get to reflect back, oh wait, but you handled this way, and then you go, wait, so did I. So you start to realize how much you do have going on and how much you have taken care of things.
It's a
So it
beautiful celebration and reframe.
totally,
Yeah.
totally,
And
yeah,
inspiration of like,
inspiration.
oh, yeah, sometimes it just takes getting yourself to show up and listen to
Mm,
hear about, ways you can advocate better for yourself and your loved one, with medical professionals, or ways you can carve out time to just re-energize yourself. It's so inspiring to,
yeah,
yeah, get that support. So truly, I think by the time this airs, we'll have some good referrals for that.
that would be, yeah, that'll be great. So let's talk. I touched base on this a little bit earlier, but let's talk about cultural differences in
Yeah.
multi-generational homes. I mean,
Yeah.
Caucasian people are not living in multi-generational homes the
No.
way others are.
We had someone come, we've been in the middle of redoing this very old house, and somebody came to our door. Your roof's really old. Do you want to get a bid? I'm like, we can't afford that yet, but yes, go ahead. Yeah, like that's down the line. We're gonna do that soon. And it was interesting because it was two guys and they run the company together, and he's Latino and the other guy Caucasian, and they were really open about the fact that they were like talking to us about our house and these old houses and how people live. And they said, I think it's so sad that we as Caucasians have, it's just less common. And it was seen like a failure if you can't move out, if you're living with your parents, right? Like, oh,
Right.
that you're doing something wrong, you lost a job or something. Whereas in his culture, and he pointed to his partner, and the partner started talking. He's like, we feel honored and we feel smart living, with three generations in one house, because they're helping. It's reducing costs of childcare. It's keeping our parents busy in a way they want to be, and as long as everyone's clear on it and nobody feels used, sometimes it's keeping their brain sharp, and it's allowing them to have, parenting from different generations, and it really helps people afford this higher cost of living. And I've been thinking about that ever since. And then you and I were talking about it earlier. It's like, oh yeah, it's stressful to actually have your parent, like you said, your dad far away, or someone might, like what my sister sees all the time is someone's living at home managing carpool and things here, and then they got to get themselves over to where their parents live
Yep.
and manage some things there, so that you're really managing two households sometimes.
I would be absolutely remiss if we didn't give a shout out to one of our biggest fans. I will only say her first
Mm-hmm.
name, but Karen, I know you're listening.
Oh,
She did exactly this. She left her career to move home and move in with her parents because they're both aging. Her dad has dementia. It was just a matter of moving cities, and she's going to, she's working and so forth as well. But she did do exactly this. And I remember she's also has been my client in times, and we kind of talked through this. And I mean, there, it is, both can be stressful in different ways, right? So now she's there living in there and sort of swimming in that water, so to speak. But it's also stressful for her. And she was only an hour away from where her parents lived. For me, I was a 4 hour flight. It was incredibly stressful to not, and again, speaking of very lucky and privileged, I was at a company, we were at both at the Health Coach Institute at the time, that allowed me to drop everything and fly home if I needed to, but those 4 hours on that plane were incredibly, stressful
yeah.
and anxiety ridden every time I had to
Yes.
fly home. And there were a couple of different times. I mean, I did fly home to be there when he passed, but when he first got sick, and we got a call from my uncle, his brother, and he was like, I think you need to come home. And I was like, oh shit, dropping everything. I mean, yeah, that's a
That's
lot.
tough.
I remember thinking when dad was going through all this and actually having a conversation with my mom at the time about perhaps moving from Mason out to California. We
Hmm.
started to kind of look at some places. Ultimately, she decided that wasn't what she wanted to do and then passed away anyways. But I remember thinking like, I can't do this again. So why don't you, and I wanted to take it off of Amy's plate too. Like, you move out here, I'll take care of you out here and manage it differently, than I had to with my dad. Um, yeah, that's its own, again. I mean, here's what I'm hearing as we're going through all of this. It is layer upon layer upon layer. It's not just, ooh, I'm sandwiched between my parents and my kids. There
Mm-mm.
is so much nuance that it's just piles upon itself.
And with our like technology, we can feel like we have to monitor everything 24/7 in
Yeah.
multiple locations,
Yeah.
and it's really taking a toll on, yeah, like you said, it's spiking cortisol. And we talked a little bit already about, like, strategies, taking care of yourself. We talked about that, carving out time for activities that bring you joy, making sure you're exercising, making sure you sleep, making sure you're hydrating, right? And eating and
Yes.
all that stuff. Spending time with friends or connecting with people who are going through it. You said, don't be afraid to ask for help. That's a really good one. Don't be afraid to hire help. Find out
Yeah.
what people qualify for. Sometimes people are leaving that on the table. They're paying for it, and then the kids think they should do it all, and they didn't realize, like, it's covered. So
Well, it
find out
goes
what kind
back
of
to
help
the
you can get.
whole, when we talked to JD, this idea of making assumptions about finances,
Right.
right? And you're better off knowing. Maybe
Right.
maybe there is, maybe yes, maybe there's some free options, maybe there's something that's qualified under insurance. Don't assume you have to take all of this burden on yourself.
Yeah. Totally. It's so true. And then I think too, the one thing maybe we didn't touch on was you might know people in this situation. And the smallest thing means so much. Like when I say to my friend, let's go visit your mom together, it is
Mm,
so nice for her to have someone else appreciate her mom. And I mean, I know my mom's fun and my friends really enjoy her, but watching them enjoy her
yeah.
and remind me how sharp she is so helpful too. Like
Yep.
that's just so lovely, and it's fun to, it's fun when we can have people enjoy our parents with us. And so
Love
I
that.
I think that any way you can, or just even offering to, people have done that with me, like knowing that, like, oh, go spend the time with your mom, Griffin can come hang out with us, right?
Yeah.
So like those kind of things are just so wonderful.
Yeah, so it's not only ask for help if you're the person who needs the help and be specific, but also if you are not in this situation, but you know people who are, don't say, let me know if you need anything. That's not helpful because they never will.
Yes. Yeah.
Say, how about I do this for you today? How about I go with you to see your mom or your dad? How about you take the mantle?
Yes.
Let me know if you need anything will never happen.
I know. And it's interesting too, because the other night we had our neighbors over before their youngest was going off to college.
Mm.
And I was like, bring your mom. She lives in town. She's super savvy, sharp, fashionable. And I was like, she may have plans, because she was a hoot too, by the way. She said, oh, a lot of my ex-boyfriends live where your sister used to work.
Oh.
So funny. It was before, she was kidding, but guys she had dated before she was married, and her husband is now gone. She's widowed. But what was interesting is I was so thrilled she came, because my mom
Yeah,
was here, and she goes, I never have anything going on. I'm always available. And I think, like, no one would think that about her,
right.
but it's like, remember that, include them. Um, so as we wrap up, oh my gosh, there's still so much to talk about. But what do you think? Because we have an aging population, and
Yeah.
some candidates talk about that, some don't. But
Hmm.
what is the future going to look like for the sandwich generation? Not just for the aging population, but what's it going to look like for the sandwich generation?
I mean, you know me, I'm usually pretty Sally Sunshine, but I will say I worry about this. This is something that we are only on the cusp of. I've said this before, not necessarily on the pod, but it was a big aha for me when my dad got sick, because my dad was uh the beginning of the boomers, and I thought, watching, trying to find a place for him to live that wasn't, that was within his budget but wasn't horrible, then managing all of, trying to get him in there, getting him to stop driving, all these things that, like we say so many times, we don't talk about.
Yeah.
I talk about it now because people know I went through this. I have people talking to me about it, and I have resources and all that sort of thing. But pre going through this with dad, like, I had no comprehension of what this was going to be. And I am certain my sister didn't either. And I just remember thinking, holy shit, the medical system is not ready for this. The Gen X is not ready for this. We
The
are
workforce isn't
the
ready for this.
workforce is not ready for this. Oh my God, absolutely. And I feel like talk about flying the plane while we're building it. That's what this feels like.
Yes.
So I say that not as a Debbie Downer, but as a reality check. And so
Yeah.
consequently, right now, it behooves whoever is going through it to really center themselves and ask, what do they need? How do they want to be experiencing this? Because it is happening. We are the sandwich generation. And as I said, it is not going to change with future generations.
No.
So start asking yourself how you want to be experiencing this and trying to set up as many support
Yes.
systems and resources as you can now.
Yes.
Don't wait for it to happen.
Yeah, I personally, not just for people like myself, but for people who are, living with and or financially responsible for aging parents, I would like to see a lot more, official recognition of a caregiver status.
Yes.
Like
Yep.
there's a lot in the world of caregivers that I'm in. There's like some fun ideas, right? Like all these kids who have to do service hours, could they go do the laundry of a parent who has like a, high medical needs, or who are what is called extreme caregivers? Those are great ideas. They'll happen here and there. Some wonderful organizations or churches will make those things happen. But I'm thinking at a state and federal level, we
Mm-hmm.
need more tax breaks and more, just we need for people who are financially responsible for aging parents, we need life to be more affordable, period. We need them to not have to work around the clock to do that and
Yeah.
completely miss raising their children in the process. I have somebody I coached at HCI who ironically was really, and I don't think she's gotten anywhere with it yet, really struggling to create a program for the sandwich generation because it was so personal to her. And her daughters are so resentful for how much time that caring for the aging mom was taking away from them and had their whole
Mm.
lives. And so she was needing to do a lot of repair there. So, you know, where can we make this a lot more mainstream, and so that people don't feel like they have to give one up to do the other and financially are stuck doing both?
Yeah. And then the irony is, I mean, I think it would be an incredible service to have a coach or a group that you can participate in to help support you through all of this. And then the first thing you think of, with what time,
Right.
but this is where if you have an opportunity to have a community around this, carve out the time. It will
Totally.
not only behoove you, but it will absolutely help the 2 generations you're in the middle of.
Yes. So does this bring us to our song?
It Speaking of which, so when I first saw this song, I was like, "Oh my god, it just takes me back to Reservoir Dogs."
Yes.
But then when I was reading it, which is its own Gen X response to things, the fact that this is what I think of this song because it was out way before
It makes me
Reservoir Dogs.
it makes me think of Grace and Frankie because it's also the intro
That's
song to
true.
Grace
That's
and
true. They
Frankie.
did
Yeah.
take that one back. That's
Yeah.
that's a good point. I guess because we were just watching Pulp Fiction, so I just
Yes.
go straight to
Yes. That
Reservoir
makes sense.
Dogs. But oh my God, Grace and Frankie, that was, yeah, fucking love that show.
Hilarious.
Oh my God, I
Yes.
love that show so much. All right, so if you haven't figured it out by now, we picked Stuck in the Middle with You. And once I pulled up the words, it kind of made me giggle. So we all know it. Clowns to the left of me, jokers to the right. Here I am, stuck in the middle with you. Yes, I'm stuck in the middle with you. And I'm wondering what it is I should do. It's so hard to keep the smile from my face, losing control. Yeah, I'm all over the place. Clowns to the left of me, jokers to the right. Stuck in the middle with
I
you.
love it. It's
Jerry
so good.
Rafferty. So
So
good.
good. Well, I really enjoyed this conversation. I feel like it's going to be ongoing. It'll probably be something we come back to.
I mean, the fact that we referenced two people, like listeners alone that we know, I mean, that's how much this
I
is.
know.
We're constantly hearing about it,
Yes.
So
Yes.
all you caregivers out there, all of you sandwich generation, like big love, big love.
Yes. Yes. And you're not alone. And
Nope.
we're here to continue this conversation to shed more light on it. And we want to hear your stories and your strategies for coping and managing it and juggling it with joy. So share them on our social media, where we're going to be posting about this every day the week this drops. And let's keep the conversation going.
Yeah, because we read the comments, other people read the comments. Worst case scenario, DM it to us and we'll throw it up ourselves. But this we say this all the time, but this is a perfect example. This is not just Kari and I talking. We want to
Mm-mm.
hear what you are going through as well. And even if it's just through social media, be able to support you in all of this.
Yes, absolutely.
All right. Well, thanks everyone as usual for listening. And definitely until next time, not just your parents and your kids, but take care of yourself.
Ah,
Bye.
bye.